This is a romance audiobook written and narrated by Rebecca Best. Settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself be swept away by a story of love, passion, and heartwarming moments. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this romance audiobook.
Chapter 1. Backstage chaos was intensifying, and Emilia Clarke's heart pounded as she checked her phone for the 1,000th time. No texts, no missed calls, nothing from Jax Monroe. She paced behind the heavy velvet curtains, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. Each click echoed the same thought. Where the hell is he? The audience was waiting, and the perfectly crafted schedule was unraveling, slipping further out of her control with each passing minute. Not just hundreds of people in the auditorium, but thousands more watching online via live stream. The pressure was suffocating. Jax Monroe, the notorious stand-up comedian with a bad boy image, was supposed to be on stage right now. 7 minutes. That's all he had to do. A quick comedy set, hand out an award, and then he was free to bask in the audience's applause. But of course, Jax had to be unpredictable. Now, in classic Jax fashion, he was nowhere to be found. Where is he? Emilia muttered under her breath, gnawing on her lower lip. Anxiety gnawed at her too, threatening to make her spiral. She turned to her phone again, praying for a sign of life from Jax. Still nothing. Sean, her best friend and the charity tour's makeup artist, appeared beside her, waving a powder puff at her face as if that was the solution to her growing panic. "Relax, darling," he said with a smile that could have lit up a room. "You know he'll show up at the last minute? That man lives for dramatic entrances." Emilia groaned. "I don't care about his entrance, Sean. I care about the fact that we're about to have hundreds of people sitting in silence, waiting for something that isn't happening." She glanced at the streaming monitor showing the live feed. Thousands were tuned in, watching every second of the delay. Sean gave her an encouraging pat on the arm. "You'll figure it out. You always do." But this time, Emilia wasn't so sure. This event was more than just another professional hurdle for her. It was a test. Her first major role in a senior position, one she had fought tooth and nail to secure. For most of her life, she had felt like second best. In her family, she had always been overshadowed by her sister, the fashion designer, and in her last relationship, her ex-Ben had cheated, leaving her feeling like she wasn't enough. This charity event wasn't just important because of the cause. It was her chance to prove to herself and others that she was good enough to lead. She glanced toward the stage, where the stage manager was looking at her expectantly. Her phone remained stubbornly silent. No Jax. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder, and when she turned, it was her boss, Nicole, the tour director. The stern expression on Nicole's face made Emilia's stomach drop. "Emilia," Nicole said, her voice firm and matter-of-fact, "you're going to have to go out there and fill in." The blood drained from Emilia's face. "What? Me? I'm not. Nicole cut her off. "We can't leave the stage empty any longer. Someone needs to stall until Jax gets here. That someone is you." Emilia's stomach lurched. Her? On stage? In front of hundreds of people with thousands more watching online? She had always been the one behind the scenes, pulling the strings, making sure everything ran smoothly. But being the one on stage? Speaking? That was her worst nightmare. I don't even know what to say," Emilia stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll think of something," Nicole said briskly. "Just get out there and keep them entertained. You've got this." But Emilia didn't feel like she had this at all. As Nicole gave her a reassuring nudge toward the stage, panic settled in the pit of her stomach like a lead weight. She could feel her heart racing, her mind blanking as the spotlight loomed just a few steps away. "Sean?" she whispered desperately, turning to her friend. "I can't do this. This is not my thing." Sean raised a perfectly sculpted brow and flashed her a knowing smile. "Oh, honey, you've got more stage presence than you think. Just smile, breathe, and pretend you're talking to me." Before she could argue, the stage manager gave her a little push, and Emilia found herself walking out from the safety of the wings. Suddenly, the walk to the microphone felt like it stretched for miles. "Oh God, I can't do this." Each step felt heavier than the last. "Am I sweating?" Her palms were clammy, and she could feel a bead of sweat trickling down her back. "Please tell me it's not visible. Maybe I should have worn black. Black hides everything, right? Oh no. Is this dress too tight? Did I eat too much for lunch?" As the spotlight brightened, her thoughts spiraled. Is my upper lip sweating? When was the last time I waxed my upper lip? Oh, God. Do I have a mustache? The panic was like a drumbeat, growing louder with every step. She resisted the urge to wipe her face, praying the sweat wasn't pooling there. She finally reached the microphone, gripping it as if it were a life raft. Her mouth felt dry, and she realized she hadn't even considered what she was going to say. Great. No plan and a mustache. Perfect. Hi everyone, Emilia began, her voice shaky. She tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Emilia, and I'm just here to fill in for a bit. The words stuck in her throat. What am I even saying? The audience stared back, waiting expectantly. She could feel their confusion, their curiosity about why some random woman was up here instead of Jax Monroe. She fidgeted with the microphone, her hands suddenly clammy. In the corner of her eye, she saw the live stream chat scrolling by rapidly and imagined the snide comments piling up. So, we have a lot of exciting things planned for tonight, she continued awkwardly, her brain scrambling for words. Lots of, surprises and laughs and, well, I guess you'll see soon enough. Her voice wavered, the awkwardness of the situation palpable. The silence that followed was deafening. Oh God, I'm bombing this. The lights felt hotter, the stage wider, and the audience more intimidating with every second that passed. 90 agonizing seconds. That's how long she stood there, fumbling for words, her mind racing. Where are you, Jax? And then, just when she was convinced she might melt into the stage from embarrassment, the side door opened, and in strolled Jax Monroe, cool as ever, completely unbothered by the chaos he'd caused. The crowd murmured in excitement as they recognized him. Jax flashed that infamous bad boy grin and made his way across the stage like he owned the place. He reached Emilia, gently taking the microphone from her hand, his fingers brushing hers. He leaned in close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Relax, Clarke. I've got it from here. Emilia's heart thudded in her chest. How does he do that? How does he just walk in, smile, and make everything okay? Jax turned to the audience with a dazzling grin, the kind that made people forget all about the fact that he was late. Sorry I'm late, folks, he began smoothly. Turns out backstage is a maze. Don't tell Emilia, though. She runs this whole thing. And trust me, she's terrifying when she's mad. The crowd laughed, hooked in seconds. Jax winked at Emilia as the laughter rippled through the audience, and she wanted to throttle him for making her look like the uptight one. But at the same time, she was relieved. The disaster had been narrowly averted, thanks to Jax's ridiculous charm. As he launched into his comedy set, Emilia slipped off stage, her face still flushed from the ordeal. Her heart pounded, a mix of frustration and relief swirling in her chest. How did he always manage to leave her feeling like this? Tense, stressed, and somehow completely captivated. See? I told you he'd show, Sean said, popping up beside her, his arms crossed with that signature knowing smile. And look at you, braving the stage like a champ. Emilia shot him a look, half exasperated, half amused. Barely. I could feel myself sweating. I'm sure I looked like I was being dragged up there at gunpoint. Sean laughed, not unkindly. Oh, darling, if the goal was to look like you were delivering a hostage speech, you nailed it. The audience was probably on the edge of their seats, wondering if you were going to hold up a help sign. Emilia groaned, burying her face in her hands. I'll never live this down. Sean waved her off, still chuckling. Please, you held it together, even when the world was falling apart, as usual. He bumped her shoulder. I swear you're the only one who can keep this ship afloat, even if it means stepping into the spotlight every now and then. Emilia sighed, leaning back against the wall. I'd rather stay behind the scenes where I belong. Sean grinned. Oh, come on, you can admit it. You were good up there. But you do know this won't be the last time he pulls this stunt, right? Mr. Bad Boy Comedian has a knack for chaos. Emilia groaned.
We're so happy you're still with us. If you're enjoying this romance audiobook, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified whenever we release more romance audiobook stories like this. We'd love for you to join us again in the future. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and now let's get back to the story.
Chapter 2. Jax Monroe kicked his feet up onto the table in his dressing room, staring at the backstage chaos through the slightly open door. The buzz of stagehands, the clatter of equipment, and the occasional distant echo of applause all blurred into a familiar hum. He leaned back, stretching his arms above his head, a lazy grin spreading across his face. Chaos? It was his playground. Well, you certainly know how to make an entrance, came Nate's voice, Jax's manager and oldest friend, from the doorway. Jax turned his head lazily to see Nate standing there, arms crossed, eyebrows raised in that judgmental but not quite serious way Nate had perfected over the years. I thrive in it, don't I? Jax said with a smirk, letting his feet drop to the floor with a thud. He stood and crossed the room to grab a bottle of water. You should have seen Emilia's face when I finally walked in. She looked like she was about to explode. Nate chuckled, stepping further into the room. Yeah, and that's the part that worries me. You can't keep pulling this crap, man. Emilia's not the type to just brush it off. She keeps everything so damn professional. Jax twisted the cap off the water bottle and took a sip, leaning against the counter. That's her problem. She's wound so tight. I'm just giving her a chance to loosen up a bit. Or you're driving her insane. Nate's tone shifted, just a hint of seriousness under his words. I'm all for a bit of unpredictability, but you could have shown up on time for once. She had to fill in for you, and from what I heard, she wasn't exactly thrilled about it. Jax grinned. She did fine. Besides, a little stress builds character. Nate rolled his eyes. Sure, or it makes her hate you. You can't always rely on charm to dig you out of the holes you keep digging. Jax shrugged, completely unfazed. It's worked so far. Besides, I like keeping things interesting. Nate sighed, sitting on the edge of the table. Look, I know you like to play things fast and loose, but you're walking a fine line. Emilia's different. She's not just some assistant you can sweet talk. She's in charge, and she's been holding this whole tour together. Jax raised an eyebrow. What, you think I don't know that? I'm not blind. She's impressive. But that's half the fun. She's so structured. I like pushing her buttons. Yeah, well, one day she might just push back harder than you expect, Nate warned. He knew Jax too well, knew that his friend had a habit of skating just on the edge of causing real trouble, only to get out of it at the last second. It was part of his appeal and part of what made managing him a full-time job. Jax waved him off. You worry too much. It's all part of the show, Nate. Maybe, Nate replied, his expression softening slightly. But don't forget you're not just performing for yourself here. The tour isn't just about you. It's for a cause, and there are a lot of moving parts you might not be considering. Jax set down the water bottle, considering Nate's words for a moment. Sure, he enjoyed pushing the envelope, whether it was with the audience, his image, or even Emilia. But there was truth in what Nate was saying. The charity tour was more than just a stage for his stand-up. It was for something bigger. He looked down at the water bottle in his hand, turning it slowly in his fingers, his expression unreadable. I know what it's for, he said, his tone quieter than usual, his voice losing its usual playful edge. I get it, Nate. Trust me. Nate tilted his head, studying Jax for a beat. He knew his friend well enough to see when there was more beneath the surface, something Jax wasn't saying out loud. Just making sure. This cause... It's not something you take lightly, I know that. But sometimes it seems like you're using all of this as a distraction. Jax's eyes flicked up sharply, but the grin that followed didn't quite reach them. Me? Distracted? Never. He pushed off the counter and grabbed his jacket, shrugging into it with a flourish. I'm here to do my thing, make people laugh, raise some money, and keep it moving. That's what this is all about. Nate didn't respond immediately, but the silence between them spoke volumes. Jax could feel Nate's eyes on him, the unspoken question hanging in the air, but he wasn't ready to answer it. Not here. Not now. Not ever, if he had his way. I know the drill, Jax continued, breaking the silence. I'll be on time next time. Maybe. He flashed Nate another grin, the one that always got him out of trouble, but this time Nate didn't smile back. Just don't let it backfire, Nate said after a pause, his voice softer, as if he was offering more than just advice about the tour. You know what this is really about. Don't lose sight of that. Jax didn't respond, just gave a slight nod as Nate left the room. Alone again, Jax stood in the center of the dressing room, the grin finally fading from his face. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly as he stared at his reflection in the mirror. This is for the charity, he reminded himself. for the people who need it. For... He shook his head, stopping that thought before it could fully form. There was no point in dredging up the past. Not when it hurt this much. Not when it was easier to keep everything buried under layers of jokes and charm. Taking a deep breath, Jax squared his shoulders and turned toward the door. Time to put the mask back on. Time to be the Jax Monroe everyone expected him to be. The one who laughed through anything and never let anything get to him. But as he stepped back into the chaos of the event, a small part of him couldn't help but feel the weight of what was left unsaid, the emotions he wasn't ready to confront. Not yet. Chapter 3. The next day, Emilia was still reeling from the after effects of last night's live event. It had been a whirlwind, and the memory of her brief, awkward appearance on stage was still fresh in her mind. How she'd survived the moment before Jax finally waltzed in, cool as ever, was beyond her. And the worst part? He hadn't even apologized, just breezed in like he hadn't been late at all. Of course he didn't, she muttered to herself, shuffling through the event schedule for the day. Typical Jax Monroe. Stagehands rushed around her as she tried to focus on the tasks at hand. The next event was hours away, but it felt like everything was on a tightrope. The tech team was still fixing issues with the sound system from last night, and Emilia couldn't afford another hiccup. Not again. As if on cue, Jax appeared, strolling toward her with that same infuriatingly relaxed swagger. He was dressed in a crisp black shirt that highlighted his muscular frame, the smooth brown of his skin catching the light. His hair, short and neatly trimmed, framed his striking features. And that smirk, God, that smirk, was plastered across his face as if he owned the world. "Morning, Clarke," he called, his voice smooth and casual, as if they were old friends. "Recovered from last night?" Emilia looked up from her clipboard, feeling her stomach clench with a mix of frustration and something else she didn't want to name. "Oh, I don't know," she replied, voice tight. "It's hard to recover when you're thrown on stage to stall for someone who doesn't show up." Jax grinned, completely unbothered by her jab. "I thought you did great, really. You look like you were born to be on stage." Her fingers tightened around the clipboard. Born to be on stage? Was he serious? She had been on the verge of a meltdown, and he was acting like she'd enjoyed it. "You could have given me a little heads up that you weren't going to be there," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Or, showed up on time." Jax shrugged, his grin widening. "Keeps things interesting, right?" "Interesting? That's what you call it?" Emilia felt a flare of annoyance. He was so casual, so unconcerned. How could he not care that everything could have fallen apart? She turned away, trying to refocus on her clipboard. "Don't let him get under your skin." But it was hard not to, when every word that came out of his mouth felt like a challenge. His carefree attitude reminded her too much of Ben, her ex. Ben had always been the charming, laid-back type, the kind of guy who could smooth talk his way through any situation. Except, behind all that charm had been lies. Ben had been hiding things for months before she'd found out he was cheating. Jax's cocky demeanor, his refusal to take things seriously, it made her wary. She couldn't afford to get caught up in someone like him. Emilia sighed and set her clipboard down, fixing Jax with a stern look. "Listen, I don't have time for games. This tour, it's important. There's a lot riding on it, and I need to know I can count on you to show up when you're supposed to." Jax's grin faltered for just a second, a flicker of something unreadable passing over his features. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by his usual playful expression. "I get it, Clarke, I do. You want things to go perfectly, but you've got to loosen up a bit. You're wound too tight." Emilia clenched her jaw. Loosen up? How many times had she heard that from Ben? How many times had he told her to relax, only to turn around and lie to her face? She wasn't going to let Jax brush her off like that. "I'm not wound tight," she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "I just happen to care about this charity. A lot of people do. And maybe if you stopped joking around for a second, you'd realize that." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Jax didn't have a quick comeback. Instead, his expression shifted, subtly, but enough for Emilia to notice. It was almost like her words had hit a nerve. But before she could figure out why, he smiled again, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know it's important," Jax said, his voice softer this time. "Trust me, I get it." Emilia blinked, momentarily thrown off by the change in his tone. There was something there, something deeper, but just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, replaced by the same cocky exterior she was used to. Anyway, Jax continued, his grin returning in full force, you did fine last night. Next time, just embrace it. You might find you like the spotlight. He walked away, arrogantly heading off to his dressing room, leaving Emilia standing there, heart pounding and brain buzzing with a mixture of frustration and something else she didn't want to acknowledge. How did he always manage to do this? To get under her skin so easily? Before Emilia could respond, Sean appeared, sweeping into the room with his usual flamboyant flair. Don't look so flustered, Sean's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. I'm not flustered, Emilia said quickly, though she knew from the look on Sean's face that he wasn't buying it. Sure, babe, whatever helps you sleep at night. Sean gave her a teasing nudge. I saw you and him having a little chat. Care to tell me why you're suddenly looking like you just ran a marathon? Emilia groaned. I am not. He's just so frustrating. He doesn't take anything seriously. Yeah, that's definitely why your cheeks are all flushed. Totally frustration. Sean teased, flipping his hand dramatically. I mean, it couldn't possibly be that you find him, oh, I don't know, ridiculously attractive? Emilia shot him a glare. Sean? Oh, come on, Sean laughed. Admit it, Jax Monroe is a certified snack. I mean, if you don't make a move, I might just have to step in. Emilia rolled her eyes, though she couldn't help but smile at Sean's dramatic flair. Please, he's not my type. Right, Sean said, raising a perfectly arched brow, because tall, hot, and brooding definitely isn't your type. Seriously, babe, the man looks like he walked off a Calvin Klein runway. He's got that Idris Elba kind of vibe, but with the playful cockiness of Michael B. Jordan. If you're not into that, I'm really starting to question your taste. Emilia felt her cheeks heat up again. I'm not saying he isn't good-looking, Sean. I'm just saying he's not for me. Too unpredictable. Unpredictable can be fun, Sean said with a wink. And honestly, if you don't at least flirt back a little, I might have to throw myself at him. A guy that hot? I'm only human, Emilia. Emilia sighed, shaking her head. You are unbelievable, Sean. Sean quickly replied, Well, you better start believing it, babe. As Sean sauntered off, Emilia crossed her arms, trying to shake off the weird tension that had settled between her and Jax. He was impossible, arrogant, frustrating, and yet, something about him lingered in her mind. She hated that he got under her skin so easily, but she wasn't going to let herself get pulled in. Not again. Not after what happened with Ben. She'd learned her lesson the hard way, and she wasn't about to repeat it. Chapter 4. Emilia flipped through the clipboard for the 100th time that afternoon, desperately trying to keep her cool. The day had already been stressful, but when Nicole had walked into her office earlier with a grim expression, Emilia knew something was seriously wrong. Emilia, we've got a situation, Nicole had said, her voice tight with concern. Emilia braced herself. What now? Leslie's down with a stomach bug. She can't present tonight. Emilia blinked, her mind racing. Leslie? As in Leslie Green, the main event presenter? Nicole nodded. Yep, the very same. She's not going to make it. Panic settled in Emilia's chest. Leslie was a pro, someone who could anchor the entire event with ease. Without her, everything would be thrown off balance. Okay, we need to find someone else, Emilia said, already running through possible replacements. But before she could get too far, Nicole interrupted. Don't worry, I've already got someone lined up. Who? Emilia asked, cautiously optimistic. Jax Monroe. Emilia almost dropped her clipboard. Jax? You're kidding, Nicole smirked. Nope, he volunteered. Said he's always wanted to try hosting something more formal. Emilia's heart sank. Jax? As the presenter? But he hasn't rehearsed, Nicole. He doesn't even know the running order. Nicole waved away her concerns. He's a pro. He'll figure it out. Plus, if he doesn't do it, you might have to. The reminder of her last humiliating stage appearance sent a chill down Emilia's spine. She wasn't about to step on stage again if she could help it. And now, standing backstage, watching Jax lounge near the side of the stage without a care in the world, her frustration boiled over. He wasn't even taking this seriously, and it was driving her insane. Are you seriously hosting tonight? She asked, marching up to him, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. Yep, Jax replied with a grin, his voice oozing with confidence. Surprised, Emilia crossed her arms, glaring at him. You realize you haven't had time to rehearse, right? You don't even know the running order. Jax shrugged, unbothered. I'll figure it out. Figure it out? Emilia's voice rose. This is an important event. You can't just wing it. Jax tilted his head, that trademark smirk never leaving his face. Sure I can. I thrive under pressure. Emilia took a deep breath, trying to rein in her irritation. This isn't about you, Jax. It's about the charity. These events matter to people. You need to take this seriously. For the first time, Jax's smirk faltered. He straightened, his eyes meeting hers with more sincerity than she'd expected. I get it, Clarke. I do. This is important, and I won't mess it up. Emilia blinked, momentarily thrown off by the shift in his tone. She could see that he meant it, that beneath the jokes and the bravado, he did care. But it was hard to let go of her frustration when it felt like he was always playing games. Okay, she said, softening slightly. But please, just stick to the script. This can't go off the rails. Jax nodded, his usual playful expression returning. Don't worry, I've got this. Emilia sighed, turning on her heel to walk away, but she couldn't shake the tension that had settled in her chest. Every time she got close to thinking Jax might be reliable, he pulled something like this. And she couldn't afford to let him screw this up. Not when the charity tour was so important. But as she glanced back over her shoulder, she caught a flicker of something in Jax's expression. He wasn't just messing around. There was more beneath the surface. Something he wasn't saying. Jax watched Emilia walk away, feeling a pang of guilt for the way she looked at him. He knew she was frustrated. He could practically see the tension rolling off her in waves. And as much as he enjoyed pushing her buttons, this wasn't the time for it. He leaned back against the wall, his usual carefree attitude slipping for just a moment. The truth was, the charity tour meant more to him than he let on. It wasn't just a gig for him. It was personal. But talking about it, that wasn't something he was ready for. Not yet. Man, you're really gonna wing it, aren't you? Nate, his manager and oldest friend, appeared by his side, raising an eyebrow. Jax forced a grin, trying to shake off the heaviness that had settled over him. Of course, I always do. Nate didn't look convinced. You know this isn't just another comedy show, right? Emilia's depending on you. You might want to actually put in some effort. Jax sighed, running a hand through his hair. I get that. I do. And I'm not going to let her down. Good, Nate said, his tone softening. Because she's right, you know? This is important. Jax nodded, his mind wandering back to the charity. The cause was close to his heart, closer than anyone realized. But the last thing he wanted was to let his guard down. So he'd keep the jokes coming, keep the walls up, and make sure no one ever saw the cracks. From backstage, Emilia watched as Jax stepped into the spotlight, the microphone in hand. Her heart pounded as she braced herself for whatever he was about to do. Good evening, everyone. Jax's voice boomed through the speakers, smooth and confident. I'm Jax Monroe, and I'm stepping in tonight because, well, Leslie couldn't make it. But don't worry, you're stuck with me, and I'll try to keep you entertained. The audience chuckled, and Emilia found herself exhaling a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. So far, so good. For those of you who don't know me, Jax continued, his smile never wavering, I'm usually on stage telling jokes. But tonight, I get to play host. So let's get this show started, shall we? Emilia watched, her tension slowly melting away as Jax seamlessly guided the event. He was charming the audience, just like she knew he would, but more than that, he was sticking to the script. Maybe, just maybe, he was taking this seriously after all. As he passed by during a break, he shot her a grin. Told you I'd nail it. Emilia rolled her eyes, but there was a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Don't get too comfortable. Wouldn't dream of it. Jax replied, his grin widening as he returned to the stage. For the first time in a long time, Emilia allowed herself to relax. Maybe things wouldn't go off the rails after all. Chapter 5. Emilia could still feel the lingering stress from the success of the previous night's event. Jax had performed far better than she'd expected, seamlessly stepping into Leslie's shoes. Now, however, that brief victory was overshadowed by the fact that Leslie's illness was worse than anyone thought, and she wouldn't be able to finish the rest of the tour. That left one major complication. Jax Monroe was now the full-time presenter. Nicole had delivered the news with her usual casual demeanor, but for Emilia, it was a huge deal. Jax hadn't had time to prepare for the entire tour schedule, and now she had to spend the entire day going over the logistics with him. The idea of being in close proximity to Jax for hours on end made her stomach churn, but she had no choice. "Okay, let's get started," Emilia said, sitting down at the table in the green room. Her clipboard was perched on her lap, already filled with notes. Her professional armor was in full effect. Emilia had always prided herself on her polished exterior, even when her emotions churned beneath the surface. Her brown hair, usually pulled back in a neat ponytail, framed her face with a few loose strands that had escaped during the hectic day. Her pale skin was slightly flushed, not from makeup, but from the stress of keeping everything under control. Her sharp blue eyes, normally focused and determined, flickered with the tension that came from working so closely with Jax. Jax, of course, was lounging in his chair, his relaxed demeanor a stark contrast to her own rigid posture. "Sure thing, boss," he said with a cheeky smile. Emilia felt her usual flicker of frustration at his casual attitude, but she pushed it aside, determined to stay focused. "The next event is in 3 days, and we need to go over each segment. Timing, transitions, everything. This is more complicated than last night. You'll need to be on your game for multiple shows." To her surprise, Jack sat up a little straighter, though his grin remained. "I get it, Clarke. This is bigger than just one night. It's for an important cause, and I know we're doing this for the people this charity is going to help, so honestly, I am taking it seriously." For the first time, there was sincerity in his voice that caught her off guard. "I'm not going to let you down," Jax continued. For a moment, Emilia felt her defenses waver. Jax's expression was genuine, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something more beneath the surface, something that wasn't just charm or bravado. But she wasn't ready to let him in, not yet. She had learned her lesson with Ben, and she wasn't about to let her guard down again, especially with someone as unpredictable as Jax. "Good," she said, focusing back on her notes. "Let's start with the opening remarks." For the next few hours, they worked side by side, running through the entire schedule for the tour. Emilia couldn't help but notice how attentive Jax was. He asked thoughtful questions, took notes, and even offered suggestions that were surprisingly good. More than that, his usual laid-back attitude started to feel comforting. As the day wore on, the tension between them shifted. Instead of the frustration that usually bubbled under the surface, there was a new kind of energy between them. Something unspoken, something simmering just beneath the surface. More than that, he was easy to talk to. His laid-back attitude, which usually grated on her nerves, began to feel comfortable. But Emilia couldn't ignore the internal conflict gnawing at her. On one hand, she admired Jax's ability to adapt and engage so effortlessly. On the other, she couldn't shake the feeling that her professional boundaries were being tested. Every glance, every laugh they shared seemed to blur the lines she had so carefully drawn. As the day wore on, Emilia noticed small cracks in Jax's usual composure. When the charity was mentioned, his playful demeanor softened, and there was a fleeting vulnerability in his eyes. It was as if talking about the cause made him momentarily drop his guard, revealing a depth she hadn't seen before. By the time they wrapped up, Emilia felt a strange mix of relief and something else she didn't want to name. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not about Jax, but there was no denying the chemistry that had been building between them all day. "Not bad for a guy who wings it, huh?" Jax grinned, leaning back in his chair, stretching his arms above his head. Emilia rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help the small smile tugging at her lips. "I'll admit, you did better than I expected." "High praise," Jax teased, sitting up and turning to face her. His eyes lingered on hers a moment longer than usual, and Emilia felt her heart pick up speed. She could feel the heat between them, the pull that had been simmering just beneath the surface since the day they'd met. And before she knew it, Jax was just inches away, his light brown eyes locking onto hers. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and the touch sent a shiver down her spine. For a brief moment, Emilia forgot about the tour, the pressure, the complications. She forgot about the fact that they worked together, that they couldn't afford to mix business with whatever this was. The room felt smaller, the space between them narrower. Jax's gaze was warm, and for the first time, Emilia felt her carefully built walls begin to crack. Her pulse quickened as she realized how close they were, how easily she could also lean in and... As Jax leaned closer, her heart raced as she met his gaze. There was something in his eyes, something that made her want to believe he was more than just the charming, unpredictable guy she had pegged him as. It was just her and Jax, inches apart, the air between them, charged with a tension that had been building for days. His hand lingered by her face, his breath warm on her skin, and she felt herself leaning in, just a little. Jax's lips hovered close to hers, the anticipation making her heart pound in her chest. She could feel the pull between them, the heat, the desire. But just as their lips were about to meet, reality crashed back in. Emilia jerked back, her breath catching in her throat as she straightened in her chair. "I can't," she stammered, looking anywhere but at him. We shouldn't do this." Jax blinked, his expression a mix of surprise and disappointment. "Why not?" he asked softly, his voice steady but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "We're working together," Emilia said, her voice tight with the effort it took to pull away from him. "This would only complicate things." Jax held her gaze for a moment longer, then slowly leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I get it," he said quietly, though she could hear the disappointment in his voice. The tension in the room shifted again, but this time it was the electric pull of attraction. It was the heavy weight of something unspoken, something neither of them were willing to admit. "Let's just stick to the plan," Emilia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, stick to the plan," he said, trying to hide his disappointment. Chapter 6. Emilia sat at Sean's kitchen counter, staring blankly at the glass of wine in front of her. Her mind was racing, replaying every moment of her near kiss with Jax. The tension between them had been undeniable, but she'd pulled away. "So, let me get this straight," Sean said, pacing back and forth in front of her. His tone was playful, but there was concern behind his words. "You almost kissed Jax Monroe, heartthrob comedian extraordinaire, and instead of finally giving in to the obvious tension between you two, you bailed?" Emilia rubbed her temples, trying to make sense of her own emotions. "It's not that simple, Sean." "Sure it is," he quipped, sliding into the seat next to her. "He likes you. You like him. Boom, kiss." "It's complicated," she muttered. "Jax is Jax. He's always out there in the public eye, charming everyone. I don't know if I can trust him." Sean raised an eyebrow. "Is it really him you don't trust, or are we talking about something else here?" Emilia sighed, knowing exactly what Sean was hinting at. "It's not just him. It's the situation. The spotlight, the rumors, the fact that guys like him always seem to be hiding something." She paused, her thoughts trailing back to her ex, Ben. "I've been down this road before. Ben kept secrets from me, and I ignored all the red flags until it was too late. Now, my gut tells me Jax is hiding something too, and I can't go through that again." Sean's expression softened. "Babe, you're basing everything on a past that's not even here anymore. Jax isn't Ben." "I know," Emilia whispered, her voice faltering, "but I can't shake the feeling that I'm going to get hurt again. And what if I'm not enough for him? He's always surrounded by people, other influencers, models, actors. How could I ever compete with that?" Sean placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Emilia, you don't have to compete. If Jax is interested, it's because he sees you for who you are. But you have to decide if you're willing to let go of that fear and let him in." Emilia bit her lip, feeling the weight of Sean's words. She wanted to believe she could let her guard down, but the scars from the past made it so much harder than she wanted to admit. "I don't know if I can do that." Sean smiled gently. "You'll figure it out, but don't let fear stop you from finding something real." Across town, Jax sat in silence, staring at the flickering light of the TV in Nate's apartment, though he wasn't really watching. His mind kept circling back to Emilia, the way she'd looked at him before she pulled away, like she wanted to trust him but couldn't. Nate wandered into the room, shaking his head with a grin. "You've been zoning out all night, man. What's going on in that head of yours?" Jax shrugged, his usual playful charm absent. "It's Emilia. I'm not sure what to do." "Let me guess," Nate said, dropping onto the couch beside him. "You like her, but you can't figure out why she's keeping her distance? Jax nodded, running a hand through his hair. She's different. She doesn't fall for my usual lines, and I like that about her, but I can tell she doesn't trust me. Nate studied him for a moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Well, can you blame her? You've spent years building this persona, man, the charming bad boy, the guy who never takes things too seriously. But if you're trying to connect with someone like Emilia, she's not going to be swayed by that. Jax leaned back, exhaling deeply. I know, but I'm not sure how to change that. This whole public image thing, it's all I've got. If I let it go, what have I got left? Nate frowned, his gaze steady. What's left is you, the real you. And maybe that's what Emilia needs to see. Jax swallowed hard, the weight of Nate's words pressing down on him. He hadn't shown anyone the real him since he was 14 years old. The tour, the charity, it all brought back memories he'd tried to bury. But the cracks were starting to show. It stirred something deep inside him, something he wasn't ready to confront. Not yet. Look, Nate continued, if you really want to connect with Emilia, you're going to have to let her in. I mean, really let her in. You can't just keep using that comedian charm as a shield. Jax glanced at his friend, frowning. What if I'm not ready for that? Then you're going to lose her, Nate said bluntly. Because someone like Emilia, she's not going to stick around for a guy who's only half in. If you want her, you need to let her see the real you. She's never going to trust you until you let her in. Jax clenched his fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He knew Nate was right. Emilia deserved more than his public persona, more than the walls he'd built up. But letting her in meant confronting the very thing he'd spent years running from. He wasn't ready to tell her everything. Not yet. But if he didn't, he knew he'd lose her before he even had a chance. I don't know how to do that, Jax admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Nate clapped him on the shoulder. You'll figure it out, but you'd better do it soon, before it's too late. Jax stared at the TV, the flickering light casting shadows on his face. He knew he needed to make a choice, keep hiding behind his persona, or take a leap and let Emilia in. He just wasn't sure which one scared him more.
We just wanted to pop in to say that we are so happy that you are still listening to this point. If you are enjoying this romance audiobook, it would really help us out if you can hit the like button. We hope you continue to enjoy this story and would really appreciate it if you can just hit that like button. Thank you. Now back to the story.
Chapter 7. Emilia was standing in the wings of yet another venue, clipboard in hand, as she watched the crew finish setting up. The charity tour had turned into a whirlwind, with one city blending into the next, but each event required meticulous planning. And now, with Jax as the full-time presenter, that meant even more coordination between them. She sighed. Spending so much time with Jax was doing strange things to her mind. Their almost kiss replayed itself far too often in her head, like an annoying pop song she couldn't shake. And the worst part? She couldn't decide if she was glad she'd pulled back or if she regretted it. You're thinking too hard again? Sean's voice interrupted her thoughts as he strolled up to her, makeup brushes tucked into his belt. His eyes sparkled with mischief, and Emilia knew exactly what he was about to bring up. I'm not, she protested half-heartedly, but Sean wasn't buying it. Oh, please. You've been in your head all morning. Is it about Mr. Tall, dark, and too hot for his own good? Sean asked, arching an eyebrow. Emilia shot him a withering look. Can we not? No, we absolutely must, Sean said, leaning closer. You can't keep pretending you're not into him. Emilia sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's not that simple, Sean. He's constantly in the public eye. People are always watching him. I don't know if I can handle that. Or is it that you don't know if you can trust him? Sean asked pointedly, his voice softening. Emilia bit her lip. That was the real crux of it, wasn't it? Jax had this effortless charm, and she knew he could win over any room with a smile. But that charm also meant he was surrounded by female influencers, always laughing, always flirting for the cameras. How could she compete with that? I'm not like them, Emilia admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not glamorous or flashy, and I don't know if I want to live in the spotlight like he does. Sean crossed his arms, studying her closely. If you're this hung up about it, maybe it's time to ask yourself if you're ready to walk away. Either you trust him or you don't. And if you don't, you need to figure out what you want. Emilia felt a pang of anxiety twist in her gut. What if I can't trust him? I mean, he's great when we're alone, but the second we're around other people, it's like he's a different person. Sean rested a hand on her arm, his voice gentle. If you want this to work, you need to decide. You've got to let him in or you've got to let him go. But staying in limbo like this, it's going to drive you crazy. Emilia knew he was right. Sean always had a way of cutting through the noise in her head, but the truth was hard to face. Could she trust Jax? Could she handle his world? Before she could answer, Jax appeared from the other side of the stage, making his way over. He flashed that signature grin at her, and despite everything, her heart did a little flip. "Ready for another big night, Clarke?" he asked, his tone light and teasing. Emilia forced a smile. "Always." Back in his dressing room, Jax was pacing, a rare occurrence for him. Nate leaned against the wall, watching him with an amused expression. "So let me guess, this is about Emilia again?" Nate said, crossing his arms. Jax sighed. "Yeah, it's getting complicated." "Complicated how?" Nate pressed. Jax stopped pacing, running a hand through his hair. "She's pulling away. I mean, we've been spending all this time together, but it's like she's building walls. Every time I get close, she shuts down." Nate nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And you think that's just her? Or do you think maybe it's the way you've been handling things?" Jax frowned. "What do you mean?" "Look, man, you've been doing this for years. This public persona, the flirting, the constant attention online. That works for your career. But if you're serious about Emilia, you've got to show her something different. You've got to make her feel like she's not just another part of your show." Jax leaned against the counter, his hands gripping the edge. "I know that. But how do I do that when everyone's watching? I can't just drop the act. People expect a certain version of me." Nate gave him a knowing look. "Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what people expect and start worrying about what you want. If you want something real with Emilia, you need to show her that she's more important than the persona, that she's more than just part of the show." Jax sighed. Nate had a point, and deep down, he knew it. But it wasn't as easy as flipping a switch. His entire career had been built on that public persona. Could he really show Emilia the real Jax? "You're right," Jax said, finally meeting Nate's gaze. "I need to stop treating this like it's just another performance. I need to show her that I'm serious." Nate nodded, pushing off the wall. "Exactly. She needs to see that you're willing to make space for her in your life, not just in front of the cameras." Jax took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his next steps. He wanted Emilia. He wanted something real. And now, it was up to him to prove that to her. Chapter 8. Jax sat across from Emilia in the green room, the quiet hum of crew members moving outside the door barely registering in his mind. The charity tour was winding down, and today's meeting was supposed to be about logistics for the final few dates. But the weight of unspoken words between them made the room feel smaller than usual. He stared at Emilia, who was flipping through her clipboard with a look of intense focus. She hadn't met his eyes since they sat down, and it was driving him crazy. The tension between them had only grown since the almost kiss, and Jax was torn. The more time he spent with Emilia, the more he felt something real, a connection he hadn't experienced in years. But how could he explain that to her when he hadn't even fully processed it himself? "All right," Emilia said, her voice clipped, eyes still glued to her notes. "We need to go over the schedule for the last 2 weeks. There's no room for mistakes this late in the tour." Jax nodded, though his mind wasn't on the logistics. He could feel the distance between them, a tension lingering in the air ever since that moment, when they were so close to kissing, and she pulled back. "Emilia," Jax said finally, trying to catch her gaze. "About the other day." "Jax," she cut him off, her eyes briefly flashing with something he couldn't quite read. "We don't need to talk about it. Let's just focus on finishing the tour." Jax leaned back in his chair, frustration flickering inside him. How could she pretend like nothing happened? Like they weren't both feeling this tension? But if she wanted to act like everything was business as usual, fine. He wasn't going to push her. "Fine," he muttered, though his tone held a hint of challenge. "Let's get through the logistics." They went over the schedule, discussing every detail, but Jax's mind kept drifting. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about how, beneath her cool exterior, there was someone deeply passionate and vulnerable. The way she threw herself into her work, the way she tried so hard to control everything. He understood it. He admired it. But it also made him wonder, why was she so afraid to let him in? "So, what's your take on the charity?" Jax asked, trying to steer the conversation somewhere more meaningful. "You've been so focused on the details. Have you thought about what this tour is really for?" Emilia paused, clearly caught off guard. She looked at him for the first time since the meeting started, her expression softening just a bit. "I mean, of course I care about the cause. But I've been so wrapped up in making sure everything goes smoothly, I guess I haven't stopped to think about the bigger picture." "That's what I'm talking about," Jax said, leaning forward. "It's easy to get lost in the logistics, but the work we're doing here, it's more than just putting on a show." Emilia nodded, her eyes lingering on his for a moment longer than usual. "I know it's important. I just—" She trailed off, biting her lip as if unsure whether to continue. "You just what?" Jax prompted gently. "I guess I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I don't focus on the details, if I don't make sure everything is perfect, it'll all fall apart. And I can't let that happen. Not after everything." Jax's heart ached as he saw a flash of vulnerability in her eyes. He understood that fear more than he wanted to admit. But there was something she wasn't saying, something deeper. He could feel it, and it made him wonder how much of her hesitation had to do with the tour, and how much had to do with her fear of trusting him. "You won't let it fall apart," Jax said, his voice steady. "You care too much for that. But not everything has to be perfect, Emilia. Sometimes the best things come from the mess." She met his gaze again, and for the first time, Jax saw her walls start to crack. There was something so real in her eyes, something raw, and it made him want to reach out to show her that she didn't have to carry all this weight on her own. "I'll try to remember that," she said softly, her tone lighter than before. They continued to work through the schedule, but the atmosphere had shifted. Their conversation flowed more naturally, the tension between them replaced by something warmer. Jax found himself opening up more than usual. He still wasn't ready to open up fully, but he was letting her see a side of him that most people never did. He didn't have to perform for her, didn't have to be the charming comedian everyone expected. With Emilia, he could be real. As they wrapped up the meeting, Jax leaned back, feeling a strange sense of peace. He wasn't used to this feeling of wanting something deeper, something more than just the surface-level connections he'd had in the past. But with Emilia, it felt different. "Want to grab dinner?" he asked, his voice casual, though his heart was racing. Emilia hesitated for a moment before offering him a small, genuine smile. "Yeah, I'd like that." As they left the green room together, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this day had marked a turning point. Whatever had been holding them back before, it was starting to fade. And for the first time, Jax realized he wanted more than just a fleeting connection. He wanted something real with Emilia. Chapter 9. Dinner wasn't supposed to feel like this. When Jax had invited Emilia out after their meeting, he'd framed it as casual, just two colleagues grabbing a bite after a long day of work. Nothing formal, no expectations. He'd even suggested a laid-back burger bar nearby, thinking it would keep things relaxed. But now, as they sat in a booth together, their legs occasionally brushing under the table, the air between them felt far from casual. The burger bar was bustling with the sounds of clattering plates and the murmur of conversation. But to Jax, it was as if the world had narrowed to just him and Emilia. She was scanning the menu, her brows slightly furrowed. "These burgers are kind of expensive, don't you think?" she said, looking up at him. Jax chuckled, leaning back against the booth. "Trust me, they're worth it. You'll understand when you take the first bite." She gave him a skeptical smile, setting the menu aside. "Okay, I'll hold you to that." The initial tension between them seemed to ease a little, but Jax could still feel it simmering beneath the surface. Maybe it was the memory of their almost kiss, or maybe it was something else entirely. He wasn't sure yet, but he knew he wanted to break through it. "So," he said, leaning forward slightly, "what do you do when you're not running around making sure I'm following the rules?" Emilia raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching into a small smile. You mean when I'm not keeping you in check? Exactly. She hesitated for a moment, then met his gaze. I bake. Jax blinked, surprised. You bake? Yeah, Emilia's smile grew. It's calming, like therapy. There's something about following a recipe and creating something from scratch that just makes the world feel simpler. He grinned, intrigued. Cupcakes or cakes? Both, but cupcakes are my favorite. Cupcakes, huh? Jax leaned in, his eyes twinkling with amusement. You know, you could totally start a video channel with that. Show people how to bake while balancing a crazy work schedule. Emilia chuckled, shaking her head. I doubt anyone would want to watch me bake. I'm serious, Jax said with a mock-serious expression. We could do it together. I'll crack jokes, you crack eggs. We'll call it punchlines and pastries. The absurdity of Jax's idea took Emilia by total surprise and at the worst possible time. Just before Jax delivered his punchline, Emilia had just taken a sip of her drink. Emilia couldn't help herself. Her laugh came out so fast, and before she could stop it, her drink, which she had just taken a sip of, shot straight out of her nose. Time seemed to freeze for a split second as Emilia clapped her hands to her face, mortified, while Jax's eyes widened in surprise before he burst into uncontrollable laughter. You're kidding me! Jax howled, nearly doubling over as he tried to catch his breath. Oh my God, did you just... Don't say it, Emilia groaned. Her face flushed deep red as she grabbed a napkin and dabbed at her face. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. But Jax couldn't stop laughing, wiping tears from his eyes. That was perfect. That was the best thing I've seen in ages. Great, Emilia muttered, still red-faced but laughing a little now too. I'm so glad my humiliation is your entertainment. Jax wiped away tears of laughter, trying to compose himself. That was amazing. Your nose blew a bubble before your drink flew out. I'm calling you Bubbles from now on. Call me that, and I'll kill you, Emilia threatened, though her voice was light and teasing now. The tension between them shifted, the air lighter than before. As their laughter died down, Jax found himself watching Emilia more closely. The way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way her embarrassment melted into amusement, it made her seem so real, so genuine. As they waited for their food to arrive, and as the moment of humor passed, Jax could feel the pull between them growing stronger. Their shoulders were still close, their knees brushing under the table. He leaned in slightly, watching her expression shift from laughter to something more serious. For a brief moment, it was just the two of them again, the sounds of the burger bar fading into the background. Jax's hand moved to brush against hers, testing the waters. Emilia didn't pull away. In fact, she looked up at him, her eyes flicking to his lips for the briefest second. His heart pounded. This time, he wasn't going to miss the moment. But just as Jax leaned in closer, a flicker of light caught his eye. He glanced toward the window and saw a group of people with their phones out, filming them. His stomach dropped. Em? He murmured, his voice low. Emilia opened her eyes, following his gaze. When she saw the onlookers, her face paled. The moment shattered. They're filming us, she whispered, pulling back. Jax sighed, leaning back in his seat. I'm sorry, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. I didn't think we'd have an audience. Emilia offered a small, tight-lipped smile, but the tension was back. It's not your fault, she said quietly. I'm just not used to this. Jax nodded, the weight of his public life pressing down on him. I wish things were different, he muttered, feeling the loss of the moment as keenly as she did. They sat in silence for a few beats, the intimacy of the evening now tainted by the presence of onlookers. Jax hated it. He hated that his life, his fame, always seemed to intrude at the worst times, and he hated even more that it was making Emilia pull away. I just want things to be simple with you, he said softly, almost to himself. Emilia glanced at him, her expression softening slightly. Maybe we can figure it out, she said, offering a tentative smile. Jax met her gaze, and despite the interruption, he felt the connection hadn't been completely lost. Yeah, he agreed. Maybe we can. As the dinner continued, the atmosphere between Jax and Emilia became even more relaxed. They shared stories about their lives, with Jax making Emilia laugh with his tales from the comedy circuit and Emilia surprising Jax with her dry humor and relatable anecdotes about her more reserved life. Despite the initial awkwardness that hung between them at the beginning of the date, they both managed to move past it and found themselves enjoying each other's company more and more. They laughed about awkward moments in their careers, shared thoughts about the tour, and even spoke about their dreams for the future. Jax was drawn to Emilia's candidness, appreciating how she could make him feel grounded, while Emilia found herself appreciating Jax's ability to keep things light while also being thoughtful when it mattered. By the time they finished their meal, both felt the ease of a connection that was growing deeper than either had anticipated. The night had brought them closer in a way that made them both want more, despite neither of them expecting it. Despite the earlier interruption, Jax couldn't deny how much he had enjoyed Emilia's company. There was something about the night, about her, that made him want to keep it going. "How about we grab a drink at a nearby bar?" Jax suggested, his voice casual, though his eyes hinted at more. Emilia smiled but shook her head. "As tempting as that sounds, I think I'd better call it a night. We have that meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the next show, remember?" Jax couldn't help but grin. "Ah, ever the professional." "Someone has to be," Emilia teased lightly, her tone softening. Jax flagged down a cab for her, a small part of him disappointed that the night was ending sooner than he'd hoped. As the taxi pulled up to the curb, he opened the door for her, his hand resting on the doorframe, reluctant to let her go just yet. Emilia hesitated before stepping inside, glancing up at Jax. "Thanks for tonight," she said, her voice quieter now. "It was fun. Really fun." "Yeah, it was," Jax agreed, his eyes locking with hers. "We should do it again sometime. Maybe without the audience next time." Emilia chuckled softly. "I'd like that." Without thinking, Jax reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Emilia's breath hitched, and for a second they both stood there, caught in the electricity between them. But she didn't move closer, and neither did he. It wasn't the right time, yet. "Good night, Jax," Emilia said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that made him smile. "Good night, Bubbles," he replied, stepping back to let her into the cab. The reference to the night's earlier event immediately prompted a stern look from Emilia, which was quickly followed by a smile. As the cab pulled away, Jax stuffed his hands into his pockets, watching as the taillights disappeared down the street. He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been a turning point. Even without the kiss, something between them had shifted, deepened. He was about to head in the opposite direction when a group of people approached him, their phones already out. "Hey, Jax, can we grab a selfie?" Jax gave them his usual charming smile, obliging the requests, but his mind wasn't really on the pictures or the fans. It was on Emilia, on how much he wanted to spend more time with her, and how the public always seemed to intrude on what he wanted to be private. As he walked away from the crowd, his thoughts drifted back to the date. Despite the interrupted kiss and the constant presence of people watching, it had been one of the best nights he'd had in a long time. In the cab, Emilia leaned her head back against the seat, a small smile playing on her lips. Her heart was still racing from the almost kiss, and though they hadn't kissed, she felt a connection with Jax that ran deeper than she expected. She thought about how easy it was to talk to him once the initial awkwardness had passed, about how he'd made her laugh more than she'd laughed in ages. Despite her reservations about his public persona, there was something real about him, something that made her want to get to know him even more. Tonight, she felt closer to Jax than ever before, but her gut told her that there was still something he was holding back, something he wasn't ready to say. But Emilia didn't want to dwell on it. As the city lights blurred past the window, Emilia's mind wandered back to Jax's words. "Maybe we can figure it out." Maybe they could. Chapter 10. Emilia stepped into work that morning, feeling an unexpected lightness in her chest. The date with Jax the night before had gone so well, better than she could have imagined. They had laughed, shared stories, and for the first time, she had felt a real connection with him. The way he looked at her made her feel like she was the only person in the room, and how easy it was to be around him. It wasn't just the conversation that had stuck with her, though. It was the way he made her feel, like she mattered, like he was seeing her for who she really was, beyond the chaos and stress of their professional lives. She had felt a closeness with Jax that made the rest of the world fade away, and as she replayed the evening in her head, she couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she could trust him, like maybe there was something real growing between them. She was finally allowing herself to think that perhaps Jax was more than his public persona, more than the charming comedian who loved the spotlight. She had seen glimpses of the real him, someone thoughtful, someone who wanted to know her beyond the professional walls she always kept up. It had felt like a turning point, a chance for something more. But as soon as she stepped backstage, the buzzing atmosphere quickly pulled her out of her daydreams. There was an unusual amount of excitement in the air, with people crowded around one of the computer screens, whispering and gesturing animatedly. "What's going on?" Emilia asked, still feeling the warmth of the previous night as she approached her desk. Before anyone could answer, Nicole appeared, eyes gleaming with the kind of energy she only had when there was some juicy gossip. "Looks like Jax has made headlines again," Nicole said, smirking as she clicked through a few windows on the computer. "You've got to see this." Emilia's stomach immediately tightened. She felt the first inkling of panic rise in her chest. "It's going to be about me and Jax." Her mind spiraled into overdrive. Someone must have posted pictures of us from last night. What if people caught us in a private moment? Were the pictures compromising? She could already imagine the gossip that would follow, the commentary on every detail. Nicole didn't notice Emilia's rising anxiety as she pulled up the viral footage. The video started playing, and as soon as Emilia saw it, her world seemed to come crashing down. Jax was in the frame, but not with her. He was in a dimly lit bar, his arm draped casually over the shoulder of another woman, a famous social media influencer. They were laughing together, leaning in close, their body language far too intimate. The woman's hand rested lightly on his chest as they shared what looked like a private joke, completely unaware of the cameras capturing the moment. The video cut off just as the woman leaned in closer, sending social media into a frenzy. Her heart sank. How could he? After last night, after the connection she thought they had, how could he be with someone else, so soon and so publicly? "This is going to be great for the show," Nicole said, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside Emilia. "The gossip is going to drive even more traffic to the live streams. It's already blowing up online." Emilia barely heard her. She was frozen in place, staring at the screen as the comments rolled by underneath the video, filled with speculation. Words like new romance, mystery woman, and Jax Monroe's new fling popped up, one after the other. Her heart shattered. This wasn't just some harmless prank or misunderstanding. Jax had been out with someone else so easily and so publicly. After everything they'd shared the night before, after he had looked at her like she was the only person in the world, he had gone to someone else. Blindsided and betrayed, Emilia turned and fled the room, not caring about the whispers or curious glances from her coworkers. She couldn't stay there, not with the video replaying over and over in her mind. She burst into Sean's dressing room, finding him mid-makeup touch-up. He looked up, immediately noticing the distress on her face. His easygoing smile vanished. "Em, what happened? I thought..." Her voice broke as she tried to explain, the words catching in her throat. "I thought we had something. Jax and I went out last night, and I thought it meant something." Her breath hitched as she wiped at the tears threatening to fall. "But today there's a video of him with some other influencer, laughing, touching, and it's all over the internet. I feel like such an idiot." Sean's face hardened. "That jerk. I can't believe this. Men can be such trash sometimes, especially ones in the spotlight." Emilia pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "I can't do this, Sean. I thought I could handle his world, but I can't. I can't compete with these other women, always surrounding him. I'll finish the tour, I'll be professional, but after that..." She took a deep breath, her voice hardening. "I knew it all along. All along I said there was something that he was hiding. I knew it from the beginning, but I still trusted him. This is exactly what happened to me last time." Sean pulled her into a hug. "You deserve so much better than this. After everything you've been through, you don't need another man making you feel like you're second best." Emilia's voice cracked. I'll finish the tour, be professional, but after that, I'm done. I won't let him do this to me. Jax approached Sean's dressing room, feeling the weight of every step he'd taken to get there. He raised his hand, ready to knock, but his stomach was in knots. After seeing the video and Emilia's reaction, he knew he had to explain. He had to make her understand that it wasn't what she thought. The door opened before he could knock, revealing Sean, who stood there, arms crossed, with a cold glare. "What are you doing here, Jax?" Sean's voice was like ice. "Please, Sean, I need to talk to Emilia. I need to explain," Jax said, his voice strained but sincere. Sean gave him a hard look, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't think she wants to hear what you have to say right now." Jax's chest tightened. "Please, I just need a minute." Sean hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before stepping aside, letting Jax through. "You get one shot, Monroe. Don't screw it up." Jax walked into the room, his heart pounding as he saw Emilia sitting on the couch, her back straight, arms crossed tightly. She didn't look at him when he entered. She was staring off into the distance, her jaw set, her entire body rigid. "Emilia, please," Jax began, taking a step toward her. "I know what you saw, but it's not." Emilia shot up from the couch, her eyes blazing as she finally turned to him. "Don't," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "I don't want to hear it." Jax froze, the words dying in his throat. "I've heard enough, Jax. I don't need your excuses or your justifications," Emilia continued, her voice growing louder with every word. "You were out there with her, all over her, and now you expect me to believe whatever lie you're about to spin? No, I'm done." Jax's heart hammered in his chest. "But Emilia, if you'd just listen." She cut him off, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I'm not listening to anything, Jax. I've been down this road before, and I'm not going to let you make me feel like a fool. Not again." Before Jax could say anything else, Emilia turned on her heel and stormed toward the door. She grabbed the handle, yanking it open with such force that it banged against the wall. Without looking back, she walked out, leaving Jax standing there in stunned silence. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He found himself staring at the door as if willing her to come back. But it was too late. She was gone. Later that day, Jax slumped on the couch in his dressing room, staring at the floor. The whole day had been a mess, and the look on Emilia's face when she walked out of Sean's dressing room haunted him. He barely noticed when Nate entered, closing the door behind him. "Well, that was a disaster," Nate said, walking over and leaning against the counter. "I saw the video. I can't believe something we shot a year ago has somehow resurfaced now." Jax glanced up, his face tight with frustration. "Me neither. I have no idea how it resurfaced, but now it's blown everything apart." Nate shook his head. "Someone must have kept a copy, probably the influencer or someone from her team. Either way, it's out there now, and there's not much we can do about that." Jax exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Emilia won't even talk to me. I couldn't get 2 words out before she shut me down and stormed out." Nate raised an eyebrow. "Can't really blame her, man. Seeing that video, she's probably thinking the worst, and the timing of it wouldn't have helped either. She just needs time to cool off." Jax clenched his fists, feeling the frustration rising inside him again. "But she won't let me explain. I can't believe something that was filmed a year ago is coming back to haunt me now." Nate's voice softened, but it was firm. "She's hurt right now, man. You've got to let her process it. But when she's ready, you'll explain everything. Tell her the truth, that it was a stupid stunt from a year ago that got out of hand. She'll understand that you weren't trying to hurt her." Jax stared at the ground, still feeling the weight of the situation. "I just hate that she's lumping me in with all the people who've hurt her. I don't want to be that guy." Nate clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then show her you're not. You've got to be patient, Jax. When the dust settles and she's ready to listen, you can tell her the whole story. Let her know it wasn't what it looked like." Jax nodded, though the knot of anxiety in his chest remained. "I just don't know if time is enough. What if I've already lost her?" Nate gave him a reassuring look. "You haven't lost her. She's angry, sure, but she's also smart. Once she's calmed down, she'll realize there's more to this than a dumb video. You'll get your chance to make things right." Jax sighed, leaning back into the couch, the weight of Nate's words pressing down on him. He wanted to believe it wasn't too late, that there was still a chance to fix things. But right now, all he could do was wait and hope that when the time came, Emilia would be willing to hear him out. Chapter 11. The green room felt like it was closing in on Emilia as she sat by the corner table, absent-mindedly holding her clipboard. The show was just a couple of days away, and she hadn't seen Jax since that horrible day when everything seemed to unravel. No meetings, no interactions, just silence. And as much as she tried to convince herself that she had done the right thing by walking away, the doubt gnawed at her. She sighed, feeling the weight of her unresolved emotions settle in her chest. Had she been too quick to push him away? Had she allowed her fear to cloud her judgment? The door creaked open and her heart jumped. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Emilia? Jax's voice was quiet, careful. Can we talk? Please? She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. The instinct to shut him out again battled with the part of her that still cared, the part that wanted to hear him out. Against her better judgment, she turned to face him. Go ahead, she said, her tone sharp despite her inner conflict. You wanted to talk, so talk. Jax stepped further into the room, his expression earnest and filled with a tension she hadn't seen before. I know I messed up. It's not what it seems. It was filmed a year ago for a promo stunt. We were supposed to use it to drum up attention, but we scrapped the whole idea because it felt wrong. I never thought it would get out, and I definitely wasn't expecting it to come out now. Her heart raced as his words sank in. A mix of relief and embarrassment flooded her. So it wasn't real. It had been a mistake, a staged moment, not the betrayal she had thought. But now, standing here with him, she couldn't shake the lingering doubt. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice softer now, but still laced with hurt. Why didn't you say something if it meant nothing? Jax stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I didn't think it would ever come up. It was just some dumb idea we scrapped because it wasn't right for either of us. Honestly, if you don't believe me, ask Nate. He was the one who said it looked lame back then, and that's why we ditched it. The weight in her chest began to ease, but along with it came a pang of guilt. She had been so quick to assume the worst, to shut him down without giving him a chance to explain. The embarrassment of how she had reacted gnawed at her, but there was something else too, something she wasn't ready to admit. Her arms dropped to her sides as she shook her head. I should have let you explain. I don't know if I can handle all of this. Your world, the way things seem to happen around you, it's so public. Every little thing is out there, and I don't know if I'm cut out for it. Jax's face softened, and he took another step closer. I get it. I really do. And I'm sorry I didn't see how hard that would be for you. But I'm telling you, Emilia, you're not a part of that world. Not like that. You mean more to me than some stage stunt or public persona. I care about you. Her heart clenched at his words. She wanted to believe him. She could feel the sincerity in his voice. But there was still a part of her that was scared. I've been feeling like I'm on the outside looking in. Like no matter what, I'll never really understand your life. And I'm not sure I can handle being caught in the middle of it. Jax's expression shifted, his eyes clouded with a depth she hadn't seen before. There's more to why I'm on this tour, Emilia. More than just the charity work. It's personal, but I've been scared to let you in. I didn't want to burden you with it, and I didn't want you to think it was some kind of excuse for how I've been acting. She felt her breath catch in her throat. For the first time, Jax wasn't just brushing things off or using his usual charm. He was being real with her. But even as she softened, doubts still tugged at the edges of her thoughts. I don't need to know everything right now, she said quietly, her voice trembling. But I need to know that you're willing to try, that you'll be open with me, because I don't know if I can handle these kinds of situations in the future. I don't want to be left feeling like I don't really know you. Jax's gaze locked with hers, and she saw something shift in him. I'm done hiding, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I'm going to prove it to you. No more walls. No more keeping you out. Her relief was palpable, but it was tinged with uncertainty. Could she really navigate his world? Could she trust him, knowing that this might not be the last time his public life clashed with their private moments? Emilia crossed her arms, her defenses still up. How am I supposed to believe you? How do I know this isn't just another part of your brand? Jax's eyes softened, and he took another step toward her. Because I'm standing here, in front of you, telling you the truth. I don't care about a brand. I care about you. And I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please believe me when I say, you're the only real thing in my life right now. Her heart raced, torn between the hurt and the sincerity in his voice. She wanted to let the anger go, wanted to believe him, but it wasn't easy. I don't know, Jax, she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't know if I can trust you. I'll prove it to you, Jax said, his voice firm now. I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you, Emilia. I'm done with all the fake stuff. I want something real. I want you. The vulnerability in his eyes, the way his voice wavered ever so slightly, it broke through her defenses. Jax could feel the shift in the air as he waited, his heart pounding. This was his last chance to make things right, and he wasn't going to blow it. Slowly, he reached out, gently brushing a tear from Emilia's cheek. Please, he whispered, give me a chance to make this right. For a moment, Emilia didn't move. Then, slowly, she uncrossed her arms and stepped closer to him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of dishonesty. She found none. Without another word, she closed the distance between them, grabbing him by the front of his shirt and pulling him into a kiss. It wasn't soft or hesitant. It was passionate, desperate, full of all the unspoken emotions they'd been holding back. Jax kissed her back, his hands wrapping around her waist, pulling her even closer. In that moment, everything else melted away. The video, the gossip, the doubts, it was just the two of them, finally letting go of all the tension that had been building for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Emilia leaned her forehead against his, a small, tentative smile playing on her lips. Maybe we can figure this out. Jax grinned, his heart lighter than it had been in days. Yeah, maybe we can. Emilia leaned into Jax's chest, letting the warmth of his embrace ground her, her heart still racing from the intensity of their kiss. It wasn't just the kiss itself, though that had been overwhelming in all the right ways. It was the release of everything she'd been holding in for so long. The fear, the doubt, the whirlwind of emotions that had been swirling around her for weeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything seemed to settle, like the storm that had been brewing between them had finally passed, leaving behind nothing but calm. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, feeling the steady rise and fall of Jax's chest beneath her cheek. His arms around her felt like a promise, one she hadn't realized she needed until this very moment. All the walls she'd built up, the defenses she'd kept in place to protect herself, seemed to crumble away, leaving her vulnerable but safe in a way that surprised her. She'd been so afraid that being with Jax would mean constantly fighting to stay afloat in his chaotic world. But right now in his arms, none of that mattered. The chaos had quieted, and for once she felt at peace. The tension that had weighed down her shoulders for days, maybe even weeks, lifted, like a heavy burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. She let out a small, contented sigh, her body sinking into his as if she belonged there. And maybe, just maybe, she did. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself to the reality of the moment. It felt surreal, this connection between them, the ease of their closeness after all the confusion and misunderstanding. She wasn't used to letting herself feel this deeply, to trusting someone so completely. But with Jax, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt inevitable. Jax's hand gently stroked her back, and she could feel his breath against the top of her head, steady and comforting. She tilted her head slightly, glancing up at him, and saw the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the world. That same look that had thrown her off so many times before now made her feel steady, grounded. For once, she didn't have to second-guess whether what they had was real. She could feel it. Are you okay? Jax asked softly, his voice warm and full of concern. Emilia nodded, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, I think I am. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe, like she didn't have to keep fighting against the tide. With Jax, things were different. They didn't need to be perfect, didn't need to be planned. It was messy, unexpected, but it was real. And that was all that mattered. Chapter 12. Emilia sat cross-legged on the cushy sofa in Sean's dressing room, absent-mindedly flipping through her phone. The charity tour was almost over, and as much as she had been anticipating this final stretch, a nagging pit of anxiety had settled in her stomach. She glanced up at the mirror where Sean was standing, carefully applying eyeliner with his usual precision. The sight of him in his element brought her a sense of comfort, a small reprieve from the whirling thoughts she couldn't shake. "So, spill," Sean said without taking his eyes off his reflection. "You've been holed up in your apartment with Mr. Monroe, and I want details. Don't you dare try to tell me it's all been work, work, work." Emilia couldn't help but smile. Sean always had a way of cutting right to the chase. "It's been nice," she admitted, leaning back against the sofa, her heart warming at the thought of the past few days. "Really nice, actually." Go on," Sean drawled, finally turning to face her, his eyebrow raised in curiosity. Emilia bit her lip, feeling a bit shy about how much she wanted to gush. "We've spent the last few days together, just me and Jax, mostly at my apartment. No cameras, no chaos. It's been so good, Sean. It feels right, you know?" Sean's face lit up. "Oh, honey, I knew it. You two have been giving off serious, we're secretly falling in love vibes for a while now. I'm just glad you're admitting it." She laughed softly, twirling a loose strand of hair between her fingers. "Yeah, I guess I'm starting to admit it to myself, too. I feel like I'm getting to know the real Jax, the one he hides from everyone else. I've learned to trust him more, and it's scary, but in a good way." Sean gave her an approving nod, but he didn't miss the shadow of doubt flickering across her face. "All right, darling, out with it. What's bothering you? I can see it all over that pretty little face." Emilia sighed, her shoulders slumping as the weight of her worries came back to the surface. "I'm just worried, Sean. Things have been great, but what happens after the tour? I mean, we've been in this bubble, and I've loved every second of it. But when the tour ends, everything will change. Jax will go back to being Jax Monroe, stand-up comedian, always surrounded by influencers and fans throwing themselves at him. How do I even fit into that world?" Sean's expression softened as he sat next to her, resting his hand on hers. "Sweetie, you've got to stop thinking like that. You're not in competition with those girls." Emilia bit her lip, shaking her head. "I know, but it's hard not to feel that way sometimes. I mean, look at him. He's so, well, he's Jax, and I'm just me. I can't compete with all those glamorous influencers and the fans who hang on his every word." Sean clicked his tongue and gave her a stern look. "First of all, Jax has been spending all his free time with you, not with those other girls. And second, you're not giving yourself enough credit. He's into you, Emilia, not because you're some polished influencer, but because you're real. That's what he needs." Emilia gave a small, appreciative smile, but couldn't quite shake her fears. "But once the tour is over, everything's going to change. He's going to be back on the road, doing stand-up shows. We won't be working together every day, and I don't know if our relationship can survive that." Sean patted her hand, his voice soft but firm. "You've got to talk to him about this, Em. You can't keep all these worries bottled up. If you want this to work, you need to open up to him. Let him know how you're feeling." "I know," Emilia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I just don't know if tonight's the right time. He's got that big live interview, and I don't want to throw all of this at him before that." Sean raised an eyebrow. Sean gave her a sympathetic look. "Well, at least that gives you a bit more time to think. But you need to stop overthinking and talk to him soon. You don't want to carry this around for much longer." Emilia leaned back into the cushions, taking in Sean's advice. He was right, of course. She needed to have this conversation with Jax. The thought of it made her stomach twist with nerves, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. "I'll talk to him," she said softly, more to herself than to Sean. I hope I'm not getting caught up in the bubble of the tour, you know? What if this isn't real? What if it all falls apart once we're back in the real world?" Sean squeezed her hand, his voice gentle. "You'll never know unless you try, babe. But from where I'm standing, Jax seems like he's genuinely changing for the better. He's into you, and it's not just because you're here on the tour. You've got to trust that, and trust yourself too." Emilia smiled, a little more reassured by his words. "Thanks, Sean. I don't want to lose him." "And you won't," Sean said, standing up with a flourish. "But you need to stop overthinking everything. Now, I've got to finish this face. It's not going to beat itself into shape. Emilia laughed. As she left Sean's dressing room, the thought of her upcoming conversation with Jax still weighed on her. She knew she had to face her insecurities head-on if she wanted their relationship to survive the end of the tour. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Like maybe, just maybe, she and Jax could make it work.
Thank you for staying with us and listening to this romance audiobook. We have a quick favor to ask. Can you think of someone who would also enjoy this romance audiobook? Take a moment to think of that one special person. Got them in mind? Great! Now just hit the share button beneath this video and send it their way. They'll appreciate it, and you'll be helping us out too. By sharing this video, it allows us to reach more people with our stories, and for the person you send this to, it's a thoughtful way to show you're thinking of them. Now, let's get back to the story.
Chapter 13. The backstage area was a hive of activity, but Emilia's attention was focused solely on the monitor showing Jax's live interview. Her heart was racing, not from nerves about the final stop of the charity tour, but from something deeper. Over the past few days, she and Jax had grown closer, sharing quiet moments that felt so genuine and real. She was beginning to believe that what they had could last, that it wasn't just a fleeting romance born from the intensity of the tour. And we're back with Jax Monroe. The interviewer's voice snapped her out of her thoughts, and she glanced up at the screen. Jax looked relaxed, his signature charm on full display. Emilia couldn't help but smile. He was so good at this, so comfortable in front of the cameras. But that smile faded quickly when she noticed the interviewer's tone shift, as if preparing for something. "So, Jax," the interviewer began, a seemingly innocent smile on his face, "you've had quite the busy tour. How's it been traveling all over and working with so many different people?" Jax gave his standard, media-friendly answer, explaining how fulfilling the tour had been and how much he enjoyed connecting with people for a good cause. Emilia relaxed slightly, thinking it was just going to be another routine interview. But then the interviewer's smile grew a little sharper. "That's great to hear," the interviewer said, his eyes glinting with something more. "But, fans have noticed you've been working with a lot of influencers lately, right? In fact, just a few days ago, some pictures came out of you at an event with one of them. What was her name again?" Jax's posture stiffened slightly, though he maintained his easy smile. "Oh, you must mean Kelly Brighton. Yeah, we worked together on a project. She's great, very passionate about the cause." The interviewer nodded, clearly enjoying the subtle tension. Right. Kelly Brighton. That picture of the two of you together certainly got people talking. Care to comment on that?" Jax chuckled lightly, brushing it off. "You know how it is. Pictures get taken all the time. I think the picture that you are referring to was taken about a year ago. Kelly's just a colleague, nothing more." Emilia felt her stomach twist. She remembered the picture of Jax and the influencer Kelly that had surfaced a few days ago. It hadn't bothered her then. She and Jax had been spending so much time together, and she trusted him. But the way the interviewer was pushing this now made her uneasy. The interviewer leaned in, dropping his voice slightly, as if he were about to share a secret. Of course. But speaking of pictures, Jax, there's something else we've come across that I'd love to get your thoughts on." Emilia's heart rate spiked. "Something else?" On the monitor, Jax's face remained calm, but there was a flicker of tension in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone still friendly but with an edge of caution. The interviewer grinned and clicked a button on his tablet. Behind Jax, on the large screen for the live audience, a new set of photos appeared. Emilia's breath caught in her throat. It was Emilia and Jax, sitting in the burger bar, laughing, leaning in close, sharing what had been such an intimate moment. With everything that had happened over the past few days, it had totally slipped their minds that these pictures would be out there. "So, Jax," the interviewer said, leaning back with satisfaction, "care to tell us what's going on here? You and another one of your colleagues, Emilia Clarke, seem to be having quite the friendly dinner. Seems to me like you get on really well with your colleagues." Jax's pulse quickened as he stared at the pictures flashing across the screen. He remembered the moment so clearly. He and Emilia had been completely caught up in each other, laughing and talking like they were the only two people in the world. He, of course, remembered that those photos had been taken, but had totally forgotten that these images would eventually surface, and he certainly didn't anticipate being put on the spot during a live interview with thousands watching online. The interviewer's grin grew wider as he sensed an opportunity. "Looks like more than just work, Jax. Can you give us the inside scoop on what's really going on between you and Emilia?" Jax felt a rush of panic. This wasn't how he wanted to address their relationship, if that's what you could even call it yet. He hadn't even fully figured it out for himself, let alone prepared to explain it to the world. He glanced at the screen again, the pictures glaring at him like evidence of something more than friendship. "Well," Jax began, trying to keep his tone light, "Emilia's a great friend. We work really well together, and that's been the focus during this tour." The interviewer's eyes gleamed with amusement, satisfied with the soundbite, before moving on to the next question. But as the interview wrapped up, Jax couldn't shake the unease that crept over him. He glanced at the backstage monitor, hoping to see Emilia smiling and understanding, but when his eyes found her, she wasn't smiling. She was gone. The words, "just a friend," rang in Emilia's ears like a hammer pounding against her chest. How could he say that? After everything they had shared, after the closeness, the trust they'd begun to build. He had just dismissed her as nothing more than a colleague. The photos had caught her off guard, yes, but what truly hurt was how Jax had downplayed everything between them. She thought they were past the point of hiding, of keeping things quiet. They had been building something real, at least that's what she had thought. But hearing him reduce it to just friends shattered that illusion. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow as she turned away from the monitor. She couldn't stand to hear any more. Without thinking, she rushed through the hallways, ignoring the curious glances of the crew members, as she pushed open the nearest exit and stepped outside. The cool night air hit her like a slap, but it did little to calm her racing thoughts. She walked a few steps further, her legs shaky, before stopping and leaning against the brick wall. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her face, willing herself not to cry. She had opened herself up to Jax. Let him in. She thought she could trust him. But now everything felt uncertain, as if the ground beneath her had shifted, leaving her off balance and confused. How could he not see how much this meant to her? How much he meant to her? As the interview ended and the cameras cut away, Jax let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He thought he had handled it well enough, dodging the interviewer's trap without giving too much away. But as he looked around backstage, expecting to see Emilia, he realized she wasn't there. His chest tightened as he quickly scanned the room, spotting her retreating figure heading for the exit. He knew something was wrong. Without thinking, he headed outside, pushing past the crew members as he made his way toward the door. By the time he stepped outside, he saw her leaning against the wall, her shoulders tense, her back to him. "Emilia," he called softly, stepping closer. She didn't turn around immediately, but he could sense her hurt, feel the distance between them growing with each second. "I didn't mean," Jax started, but the words felt hollow. What could he even say to make this right? At the sound of his voice, Emilia's heart clenched even tighter. She wiped her face quickly, still facing the wall, refusing to let him see the hurt that was surely written all over her. "Emilia?" Jax said again, this time closer. She could hear the concern in his voice, but it only made the ache inside her worse. "Don't," she cut him off, finally turning around. Her voice was sharp, almost brittle. "Don't try to explain. I heard everything." Jax stopped in his tracks, his face full of worry. "It's not what you think, isn't it?" Emilia's voice cracked as she spoke, her emotions teetering on the edge. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're pretty good at pretending none of this ever meant anything. I've just been another one of your colleagues, right? Just someone else for you to laugh with, take pictures with, and then brush off when it's convenient." Jax's eyes widened, his expression pleading. "Emilia, that's not true. I was just trying to protect you. To protect us. Protect us? She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. What us, Jax? There is no us, and clearly there never will be. I've been nothing but a convenient distraction to you during this tour, haven't I? Someone to pass the time with between shows and interviews. And I was stupid enough to believe it was something more. No, Emilia, you're wrong? Jax stepped closer, but she took a step back, holding up her hand to stop him. I can't do this. Her voice wavered, but she pushed through, her throat tight with unshed tears. I can't be part of your world, Jax. I can't be the girl standing in the background, smiling while you dismiss everything we've shared as nothing. I thought I meant something to you, but clearly I was wrong. Jax opened his mouth to speak again, but she cut him off once more, her pain fueling every word. I can't keep pretending like we have some kind of future when it's obvious that we don't. Please, Emilia, just listen to me, Jax pleaded, but Emilia shook her head firmly. No, I can't. Not anymore. Her voice dropped to a whisper, the finality of it echoing in the space between them. Goodbye, Jax. Before he could say another word, she turned and walked away, her feet moving faster with every step until she broke into a run. She didn't care where she was going. She just needed to get away from him, from the hurt, from the reality that everything she had hoped for was slipping away. And this time, she didn't look back. Later, in the quiet of his dressing room, Jax stared at his reflection in the mirror. The weight of losing Emilia pressed down on him, heavier than ever. He had spent so long living two lives, one for the cameras and one for himself. But now, they were colliding in a way he couldn't ignore. He thought of Emilia, the way she looked at him with both hope and hesitation. He wanted to be the man she deserved, but that meant deciding on a future in the limelight and continuing to hide his insecurities or a future with the girl he was falling for. It meant making a decision that he didn't know he had the strength to make. Chapter 14. 2 days had passed, but the memory of Jax's words still echoed in Emilia's mind, haunting her every quiet moment. Just a friend. She had replayed the interview over and over in her head, each time feeling more foolish for ever thinking she could be something more to him. Sitting in front of the mirror in her hotel room, her makeup half done, she let out a frustrated sigh. She had been avoiding him, and even though they were just hours away from the final show of the tour, Emilia still hadn't seen or spoken to Jax. The thought of facing him made her stomach churn. Sean stood behind her, carefully applying the last touches to her makeup. His face was unusually serious, but she could see the concern in his eyes through the reflection. He finally broke the silence, his voice gentle. You know, Em, maybe Jax was just trying to protect you, Sean said, brushing a light shimmer across her cheekbones. I know it didn't sound good, but live interviews are tricky. People say things they don't mean to in the heat of the moment. Emilia shook her head. That's the problem, Sean. Even if he was trying to protect me, I don't want to live that way. I don't want to constantly worry about what he's going to say or what stories are going to pop up next. This whole thing, it's just been too much. Sean put the brush down and placed his hands on her shoulders, looking at her through the mirror. I get it. But do you really want to walk away from him without at least talking things through? Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but Emilia blinked them back. I've worked so hard to get here, Sean. I built my career from the ground up, and now all my colleagues are going to be gossiping about me. I've already been made to look like a fool. I can't handle this kind of attention. I'm not like him. I don't thrive in the limelight. I can't do this. Sean squeezed her shoulders gently. You're not a fool, and anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. But if this really isn't what you want, then you need to stand by that decision. Just make sure it's what you truly want. Emilia nodded, knowing he was right. But the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that a future with Jax just wasn't possible. She loved her quiet, simple life, and being with Jax would never allow for that. It was heartbreaking, but she knew in her gut that walking away was the only choice she had. Jax sat on the edge of the stage, his gaze fixed on the empty rows of seats in front of him. In just a few hours, they'd be filled with people, all cheering and clapping for a good cause. But all he could think about was Emilia. He hadn't heard a word from her since the interview, and it was tearing him apart. He'd hoped to see her at the meeting for the final show, but her boss had stepped in instead, making excuses for her absence. Now, the tour was almost over, and Jax was gripped by the sinking fear that he might not see her again once the final curtain fell. Nate walked over and sat beside him. Jax didn't need to say anything. Nate had already sensed something was off. "You've been staring at those seats for an hour, man. What's going on in that head of yours?" Nate asked, his tone light but laced with concern. Jax ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. "It's Emilia. I messed things up, Nate. I haven't heard from her since the interview, and now I don't know if I'll ever get the chance to make things right." Nate leaned back on his hands, watching Jax closely. "You've never been like this before. I mean, I've seen you date women, but I've never seen you this messed up over someone." Jax nodded, his jaw clenched. "This is different. She's different, and I feel like I've lost her." Nate paused, then spoke with the weight of years of friendship behind him. "You know, when you were with her, I'd never seen you happier. It was like you were finally grounded. But now that she's not around, I've never seen you more miserable. You're a mess." Jax laughed humorlessly, staring down at his hands. "Thanks for the pep talk." Nate nudged him. "What I'm trying to say is, if she made you that happy, and if you're this torn up about it now, maybe you need to fight for her. Stop sitting around feeling sorry for yourself and go do something about it." Jax frowned. "How?" "I already tried explaining in the interview, and look how that turned out. I thought I was protecting her, but I just ended up pushing her away." "That's your problem," Nate said firmly. "You think you're protecting her by keeping her out of your world, but maybe what you really need to do is let her in properly." Jax's eyes flickered with realization, Nate's words hitting him hard. "You can't have it both ways, Jax. You can't protect Emilia from the life you've been living. Secrets, constant public attention, stories, cameras, and expect her to be okay with that. You have to decide what's more important to you, your public profile or her." Jax felt a lump form in his throat as the truth settled in. He knew he couldn't have both. If he wanted a real chance with Emilia, something had to give. He had to make a sacrifice, and he realized in that moment that there was nothing he wouldn't give up if it meant being with her. Back in her dressing room, Emilia stared at her reflection, her emotions swirling inside her. She knew what she had to do. Walking away from Jax was the only option, no matter how much it hurt. She couldn't live in his world. She couldn't live in the shadows of his public persona. But then, why did the thought of never seeing him again make her feel like she was losing a part of herself? After speaking to Nate, Jax felt a sense of determination coursing through him. He'd made up his mind. He couldn't go back to his old life. He couldn't go back to the way things were before Emilia. After tonight's show, he was going to fight for her, for them. And if that meant changing everything, then so be it. It meant confronting the pain he'd buried deep inside. It meant letting Emilia in, showing her the real Jax Monroe, the man who wasn't always charming, the man who didn't have all the answers, and who didn't get it right all the time. It also meant letting Emilia get to know the man who was still broken from losing his sister back when he was 14. It meant showing Emilia the hurt that his public persona had been masking for years, showing her the sadness that he still didn't have the strength to face alone. Taking a deep breath, Jax made a decision. He couldn't keep hiding. If he wanted Emilia, truly wanted her, he had to be willing to show her everything, even the parts he wasn't proud of. As he left the dressing room, the determination settled in his chest. It was time for them to talk. Really talk. It was time to stop running. Chapter 15. The stage lights bathed Jax in a warm glow as he stood before the crowd, the final show of the charity tour in full swing. Applause erupted, but all Jax could feel was the steady thud of his heart. The words he was about to say weighed heavily on his chest, more than the cheers and flashing lights could ever distract him from. He gripped the microphone tighter, scanning the audience, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, on Emilia and the painful truth he'd been hiding. He knew he couldn't go on like this. "Thank you." Jax began, his voice steady, though it felt like every muscle in his body was about to give out. I want to start by thanking everyone for being a part of this incredible journey. The crew, the performers, and of course, all of you, watching here and online. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd, but Jax hardly noticed. He wasn't here for pleasantries. Tonight wasn't about just another event or wrapping up the tour. It was also about her, his sister Maya. And more than that, it was about the parts of himself he'd kept hidden, the pieces of him he feared would make him seem weak. As Jax stood on stage, the spotlight was bright and warm against his skin, but all he felt was the tightness in his chest. The laughter and applause from the audience barely registered anymore. The show was nearing its end, and with every joke, every smile he flashed, he felt the pressure mounting. This was it, the last night of the tour, his final chance. I need to be honest with you all, Jax continued, the tension in his tone unmistakable now. The audience quieted, sensing the shift. There's something I've been keeping to myself, and it's been weighing on me for a long time. This tour, it's not just a job for me, it's personal. The usual swagger he carried on stage felt more like a mask slipping, and as he wrapped up his last bit, the roar of the crowd should have brought him relief. But it didn't. Instead, there was only the suffocating weight of what he knew he had to do next. His heart pounded in his chest as the audience began to settle, expecting him to give his final thanks and sign off, the way he always did. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just Jax Monroe, the comedian. He was Jax, the brother still grieving, the man who had been running from his past for far too long. He stood there for a moment, gripping the microphone, feeling the seconds tick by as his pulse thundered in his ears. The smile on his face faltered as the truth he had hidden for so long bubbled to the surface. He had spent years locking it away, pretending that if he made people laugh, it would all go away. But now, with the tour coming to an end, he knew he couldn't walk off this stage without saying what had been buried for years. The crowd shifted, sensing a change in his energy. This wasn't part of the act anymore. Jax took a shaky breath. His eyes scanned the audience, and for the first time, it wasn't the sea of faces that grounded him. It was the thought of his sister Maya, her memory pressing against his heart. He hadn't let himself think about her like this in years, not out loud, not to anyone else. But time was running out, and the fear that had kept him silent was no longer enough to hold him back. He could feel the sweat on his palms, the trembling in his fingers. He had joked and charmed his way through every moment of his career, but this was real. This was the one part of him he had never shared, the one thing he had kept locked away. Looking toward the wings where he knew Emilia was watching, Jax's throat tightened. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about facing the truth. It was about honoring Maya. The microphone felt heavy in his hands as he took another breath, this one more unsteady than the last. It was time. Time to open up. Time to stop hiding. Jax's voice came out quieter than before, almost a whisper, but filled with the weight of the words he had kept hidden for so long. Before I bring this show to an end, there's something I need to say, something I've been avoiding for years. The audience hushed, sensing the shift, leaning forward in their seats as Jax's smile disappeared entirely. I've spent most of my life hiding behind jokes, Jax continued, his voice trembling slightly because it was easier than facing the pain, but I can't keep running anymore. His heart raced as he finally let go of the mask. This was the moment. No more stalling. No more pretending. I need to talk about someone, he said, his voice barely steady now. Someone who meant the world to me. And I've kept this hidden for too long. The silence in the auditorium was deafening, and Jax knew there was no turning back. He swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward the wings where he knew Emilia was watching, even though he couldn't see her. When I first agreed to this tour, I thought I could continue to hide behind the jokes, behind the public persona everyone expects of me. But the truth is, this cause is incredibly close to my heart. The crowd remained silent, hanging on his every word. Jax hesitated, the vulnerability of the moment almost too much to bear. He had spent so long being Jax Monroe the comedian, but tonight, for the first time, he was just Jax, scared, grieving, and unsure if exposing his pain would make everything worse. My sister Maya, his voice cracked slightly, but he forced himself to continue. She died of cystic fibrosis when I was 14. She was just 12 at the time. The confession hung in the air, and the weight of it hit Jax harder than he expected. There it was, out in the open. The reason he was here, the reason he had been hiding behind laughter for so many years. I never talk about her, Jax admitted, his voice softer now, filled with a rawness the audience had never heard before. I thought if I kept it to myself, maybe I wouldn't have to deal with it. But this tour, this charity, it's all for people like her, for families like mine who lost someone too soon. It's to help start a conversation that's difficult to have, and maybe even to shed a tear you've been holding back. He paused, letting the silence settle over the room, the audience still absorbing his words. He could feel his tears welling up in his eyes, but he didn't fight them anymore. This was who he was, vulnerable, broken, but still trying. He paused, blinking back tears that refused to stay hidden, his body rigid as he struggled to maintain control. But the emotions that had been bottled up for so long were finally spilling over. I've carried that pain with me every single day since she passed, Jax continued, his voice shaking. And for years, I thought that if I didn't talk about it, if I just kept making people laugh, I could somehow outrun it, hide from it. He wiped at his eyes, but a tear escaped, trailing down his cheek. The audience was deathly silent, their attention fixed on the vulnerability he was showing them. This tour... Jax's voice faltered again as another tear welled up and fell. He didn't try to stop it this time. This tour has been more than just a way to give back. It's been a chance for me to think about Maya again, to honor her in a way I never could before. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that would have made her proud. He choked back a sob, the pain of his loss finally laid bare. Every event we've done, every show, I felt like I was keeping her memory alive, like I was helping in a small way, and for that I'm so incredibly grateful. Jax glanced toward the wings, knowing Emilia was watching, and he took a shaky breath before continuing. I want to take this moment to thank all of you, everyone who's supported this tour, everyone who's donated, everyone who's been part of making this a success. You've all helped contribute to something bigger than any one of us, something that really matters. He wiped his face again, his voice barely steady now. Thank you. Thank you for helping me keep Maya's memory alive. The room remained silent for a moment, and then, as the applause started to swell, Jax stepped back, tears still shining in his eyes. He had finally let it out, and the weight of the truth, though still heavy, felt just a little bit lighter. The silence in the auditorium hung heavy in the air, each second stretching into an eternity as Jax stood on stage, raw and exposed. His heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he thought everyone could hear it. The truth about Maya, the grief he had kept hidden for so many years, now lay bare in front of thousands of strangers. He wiped the tears from his face with the back of his hand, feeling the weight of his confession lifting, if only just a little. The room was still, the crowd frozen, taking in the depth of his vulnerability. For a moment, Jax thought he had gone too far. Maybe he should have kept it to himself, kept Maya's memory locked away like he always had. But just as the doubt began to creep in, something extraordinary happened. It started with a single clap, soft but firm, coming from somewhere in the middle of the audience. Then another and another, until it spread like wildfire throughout the room. The sound grew louder, stronger, until the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Jax blinked, his breath catching in his throat as he saw people rising to their feet one by one. The clapping became a roar, the sound echoing off the walls, vibrating through his chest. He looked out into the crowd, stunned, as more and more people stood up, giving him a standing ovation. Tears welled up in his eyes again, but this time, they weren't from grief. They were from the overwhelming gratitude and support he hadn't expected. The applause washed over him like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jax felt seen. Not as the comedian, not as the guy with the perfect smile, but as a human being who had been through pain, just like everyone else. He tried to speak, to say something, but his voice was caught in his throat. All he could do was stand there, his heart swelling as the audience gave him the recognition he never knew he needed. They weren't just applauding the performance, they were applauding the man behind it, the one who had finally shared his truth. Jax's eyes flicked toward the wings, where he saw Emilia, tears streaming down her face as she stood, clapping along with everyone else. The weight in his chest eased just a little more at the sight of her, knowing that she had heard everything. The applause went on for what felt like an eternity, the standing ovation a testament to the courage it had taken for Jax to open up. And in that moment, as the audience cheered and clapped for him, he realized that he had done the right thing. He had honored Maya, and he had finally let go of the fear that had held him back for so long. Jax stepped forward, giving a slight nod of thanks to the crowd. His voice was still shaky as he raised the microphone to his lips, but the smile on his face was genuine, filled with both relief and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice almost drowned out by the applause. "Thank you so much." The standing ovation continued, the crowd refusing to sit down, their admiration unwavering. And for the first time in a long time, Jax felt at peace. Jax stood on stage, the energy of the crowd still buzzing from his emotional speech about Maya. He took a deep breath, wiping the last tear from his cheek with the back of his hand, and forced a smile. "I think we need to change the subject now," he said, his voice shaking with both emotion and laughter. "These tears are seriously ruining my makeup, and Sean is gonna kill me. Trust me, you don't want to meet our makeup artist Sean when he's angry." The crowd chuckled lightly, a much-needed break from the intensity. He glanced toward the wings, where he knew Emilia was watching. His heart pounded, the weight of what he was about to say pressing on him. "But before I go, there's someone else I want to thank." The crowd quieted, sensing a shift in tone once again. Jax's voice softened, more sincere now. "A few weeks ago, I met someone who completely changed my perspective on life. Her name is Emilia Clarke." A murmur rippled through the audience, and Jax smiled softly, remembering the first time she had been forced to take the stage in his absence. "You've actually seen her on stage before, though she probably doesn't want me to remind you about that. Sorry, Emilia." The crowd chuckled again, the reference lightening the mood. Jax's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "But she's so much more than that awkward moment. She's the first person I've ever felt like I could be myself around. She doesn't care about the headlines, or the clicks, or the spotlight. She sees the real me, the person behind all of this. And she's made me realize that there's so much more to life than fame or success." His voice lowered as he looked out into the audience, his heart racing. "I've spent my whole life chasing laughs and attention, thinking that was what mattered. But I was wrong. What really matters is finding someone who makes you feel alive." He looked toward the wings again, his eyes searching for her. "She's been my anchor through this tour, and she's made me understand that the real things in life are the ones that make us feel, that make us laugh, that make us cry, the things that make us human." Jax's voice dropped, quieter but filled with emotion. "And Emilia, I'm standing here today because of you. Because you've shown me that it's okay to be vulnerable, to open up, and to let someone in. So, thank you for seeing me when I couldn't even see myself." The crowd was silent, waiting with bated breath as Jax took a deep breath. "So, I guess there's only one thing left to say." He paused, his voice trembling slightly but full of determination. "I'm willing to walk away from everything if that's what it takes. Because Emilia," his voice cracked, but he pushed through, his gaze steady, "I love you. I want to build something real with you, and I don't care if the whole world knows it." Backstage, Emilia stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest as Jax's words echoed through her. Sean stood beside her, wide-eyed with his mouth slightly open, as if waiting for Emilia to move to react. But she couldn't. She was stunned, overwhelmed by the public declaration Jax was making, something she had never expected from him. He was willing to give it all up, for her. Tears pricked at her eyes and her chest tightened. For the first time in days, the constant weight of doubt and uncertainty started to lift. She wasn't just another one of Jax's colleagues or a fleeting fling born out of the intensity of the tour. He wanted something real, just like she did. Emilia took a shaky breath, wiping away a tear that had slipped free. Sean nudged her, whispering, "Go, Em. That man just bared his soul for you in front of thousands. Don't leave him hanging." Her legs felt like jelly, but she nodded, her heart pushing her toward the stage. This was her moment, too. Jax's heart pounded as he stared out into the audience, waiting, hoping. His declaration hung in the air, and the silence felt heavier with each passing second. Had he gone too far? Was it too late? But then, movement caught his eye. From the side of the stage, Emilia appeared, stepping into the spotlight. The audience murmured in surprise, but all Jax could focus on was her. Walking toward him, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She joined him on stage, standing just a few feet away, her face a mix of emotions. For a split second, Jax feared she would turn and walk away. But instead, she stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't want you to give up everything for me," Emilia said, her voice trembling slightly as she took a breath, her eyes locked on his. "I never wanted you to sacrifice your whole life. What I need, is to know that you're willing to let me in and that you want me to be part of your world." Jax's chest tightened, his throat dry as he watched her, hanging on every word. "I was scared," Emilia continued, her voice soft but clear. "Scared that I couldn't handle your world, the attention, the spotlight. I thought maybe I didn't fit and that I wasn't enough." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "But you're showing me that we can make this work, that we can figure it out together. You don't have to give anything up. I just need you to be real with me, always." Jax felt a surge of emotion swell inside him, relief and love overwhelming him. "Emilia," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "I will be real, with you, with us. I don't want anyone else, and I don't care about the spotlight if I don't have you by my side." Emilia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she smiled through them. "I love you, Jax, and I don't want to be afraid anymore." Jax's breath hitched, his heart swelling with joy. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the audience erupted in cheers. He kissed her, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through, everything they were building. They were in this together. No more hiding, no more pretending. It was real. The spotlight brightened around them, but for once, Jax didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms. Chapter 16, The Epilogue, a year later. The kitchen set buzzed with its usual pre-show energy, but today the excitement felt different. More special. Emilia adjusted her apron, stealing a glance at Jax, who was joking around with the camera crew. His laughter echoed through the studio, infectious as always. She smiled, her heart full. A year ago, she never would have imagined their lives looking like this. A year of punchlines and pastries had turned their quirky online TV show idea into a runaway hit. But it wasn't just about cakes or jokes anymore. It was about the life they were building together. They usually had a celebrity guest join them in the kitchen, but this week was different. It was Jax's birthday, and Emilia had something special planned. Today wasn't just about the show. It was about starting a new chapter, one she was about to share with him live, in front of their millions of subscribers. "All right, everyone, ready in 5, called the director, the buzz of excitement growing. Jax sauntered over to her, his grin ever present. "Ready to bake something edible this time, Clarke?" Emilia rolled her eyes, but her smile remained. "I'm not the one who burns cupcakes, Monroe." He laughed, draping an arm around her shoulders. "You love it when I mess up, gives you a reason to show off." She leaned into him, her heart swelling with joy for this life they'd created. The countdown began, and the cameras rolled. Jax had been in front of the camera more times than he could count, but this, being in the kitchen, covered in flour with Emilia, was his favorite gig. The way she moved through the kitchen with the same confidence that had always captivated him made him realize just how lucky he was. "Today's a special episode because," Emilia announced, her eyes gleaming with mischief, "as you all know, it's someone's birthday." The crew brought out a beautifully decorated birthday cake, the candles flickering under the studio lights. The live chat exploded with birthday messages, and Jax played it up, pretending to blush. "Aw, you shouldn't have." Emilia grinned. "Make a wish, birthday boy." Jax closed his eyes dramatically, leaning over to blow out the candles as the crew and Emilia clapped along. The chat was going wild, and for a moment everything felt perfect. "Before you can eat the cake," Emilia said, leaning against the counter, "you have to pull out the candles." Jax sighed, laughing. "Always making me work for my cake." He began pulling out the candles one by one until only one remained. He tugged at it, but it didn't budge. Frowning, he gave it another pull. "Why is this?" He stopped. The candle wasn't a candle at all. It was a thin white stick. The studio grew silent as realization dawned. His heart hammered in his chest as he turned to Emilia, who was beaming at him. What is this?" His voice barely came out above a whisper. Emilia's eyes shimmered with joy. "That's not a candle, Jax." She took a deep breath, her voice filled with emotion. "It's a pregnancy test." His breath caught in his throat. "Wait, does that mean?" Emilia's smile widened. "I'm pregnant. You're going to be a dad." The world seemed to tilt. His mind raced to catch up as he stared at her, frozen in place. And then, all at once, he surged forward, wrapping his arms around her and lifting her off the ground as the studio erupted in applause. The chat was blowing up, but all Jax could see was Emilia. He kissed her, tears stinging his eyes. "We're having a baby?" he whispered against her lips, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Yes!" She whispered back, her own tears streaming down her cheeks. "We are." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, oblivious to the cameras, the crew, and the world watching. For them, in that moment, nothing else existed but the love they shared and the new life they were about to start. As the cheers finally subsided, Emilia wiped away her tears, still laughing softly. "Looks like we share everything with the world now." Jax grinned, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Maybe we can keep the wedding off camera." Emilia smiled, her heart overflowing as she leaned into him, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together.
Thank you for listening to this audiobook romance novel by Rebecca Best. Remember to hit the subscribe button to be notified the next time we publish a romance audiobook, and leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of this story. Ready to dive into another romance audiobook from Rebecca Best? Just click the video on screen now, and I'll see you there.